Hi everyone, welcome to part 2 of the Snow Leopard tutorial. This part of the short tutorial is just approximately about an hour long, and it involves around about 3.5 to 4 hours of drawing time condensed down. Now this one, you can just see here in the background, I'm just doing an extra little bit finishing off around the eyes. Now this one, what we have done prior with working on pastel mat is I've shown you how to create an underpainting for your work using the watercolor pencils. Now with this tutorial, the whole point is to show you that you can create a very similar effect, but just using pure dry pencil. So you'll see with this video is very repetitive, so the voiceover is going to drop in and out. There's a little touch of real time, but most of it is speeded up to either double speed, 4 times, 8 times speed, because it's pretty much, once you see what I'm doing, it's the same thing all over. So we're going to create, first of all, exactly the same as we do with the watercolor pencils, working on the anthracite pastel mat. You'll see here I'm going in with my raw umber pencil, and if you've done your pressure test, which I'm sure you all have, haven't you, you'll see here that I'm holding the pencil a third to a halfway up. The pencil is sharp, but I'm using the side of the nib so that I can lay more pigment down slightly quicker. Now to start with, I'm going to be just mapping in, going around the edges quite tentatively, and then I'll build up speed as my confidence grows, let's say. I always quite hesitant when I'm first starting out on a drawing, just feeling my way around. You can see there all the little lines. Now, for the tutorial, purpose of the tutorial, I transferred my line drawing over using the graphite transfer paper. So that's why you'll see those lines reflecting. Now the reason I've done that is, one, because it's a tutorial for you guys, but also the markings on this girl are quite complex. So I wanted to make sure that I got pretty much all of the spots and the stripes and the markings in the right place before I start to fill with colour. Now I could have gone in straight away with my darks like I normally do, but there's a lot of this raw umber in now, and we will layer up quite a lot of layers on this, probably more than if we were using the watercolor pencil underpainting. In some areas there's me 25-30 layers of pencil using, if you've done your pressure test, sort of a 3 to a 5 on the pressure scale. But here I've sped it up again now, because you can see this is pretty much what I do throughout. We just start to feel our way around, keeping our eye on that reference photo, flicking backwards and forwards, popping in the colour as I see it. And we'll switch, but we'll mark in around the eyes in a second, because the eyes obviously and the brows are very critical to this drawing. But to be honest, what we'll do is we want to fill this sheet top to bottom, side to side, to get a nice foundation of that snow leopard in place, and then we can go in and start to intensify areas, increasing our darks, increasing our colours, building the layers. And I've taken photos throughout, so you'll see how rough the pigment is going down on that first layer of virgin pastel mat, to what it looks like after, say, 5 or 6 layers, and then after about 10 layers, how it starts to fill the tooth and starts to smooth out. There's no way you could go in with this with 1 or 2 layers and call it finished, because the roughness, the texture, the graininess will all be showing through, unless that's what you desire to have in your picture. I don't. I want fur texture, so I will keep going and keep pushing, and even on the finished piece I know that I could still go back in now and still add more layers. So as I said, I was going to mark in the upper lid, and we'll mark in some of the white of the lower lid as well, just so I've got a nice outline, and this girl then is really giving me an intense stare whilst I create her portrait. Once you've watched the video, you follow the tutorial, you can do things at your own pace, of course, or in your own order. There's no sort of, as long as you get the underpainting down, if you want to work in small areas, that's fine. Just remember which pencils you've used in which area. I try and do it so that this is obviously all I can fit into the camera, into the eye of the camera. So I work on this top part, and then I will move down, and I will do exactly the same on the mid part and then the lower part. If you want to work all over in one go, so you put your raw umber down everywhere that you can see it all over your piece, do that. If you want to work in small chunks, do that. If you just want to do a little practice piece of the fur off to one side, obviously you can do that. Work at your own pace, in your own order. I'm just showing you how I did it. I mean, I work this quite methodically. You see there I popped in a little bit of dark indigo there as well now. Just like I say, giving myself a nice, we'll come back to these eyes like I say later on 2 or 3 times, especially around the lids and the brows. It's just to give me something to work out from. When we lay this foundation down, it's literally like say colour blocking, filling in spaces. When it comes to laying fur, you'll find that I will start, like I always say to you, start with the point furthest away and work your way forward. So when we actually start to build the fur texture properly, in the next video I will start, you can't quite see her ears, but the point at the back of her head, top left and then top right, I'll work there, and then it'd be lower left and bottom right, work my way forwards. That's why the nose and the muzzle are done last, because that then allows for the fur to lay naturally on top of each other. You don't want to try and create the fur at the front and then try and draw the fur behind it. You start at the back and you lay and lay and lay the fur layers in front over the top. So here I've just picked up the black, quite not crudely, but you know, just literally just, we're pretty much, you could call it colour by numbers if you want to simplify it. Imagine there's a number in all of those little black dots and stripes and spaces, saying number one equals black. Well, we just want to fill all of those in. As I say, she is quite complicated. If you lose your way, that's fine. Just make your own version. It doesn't have to be exact. Mine is not photorealistic. I do not claim to make photorealistic drawings. I don't want to be honest. I'm trying to capture character, trying to capture the sense of the fur, the texture. I create a likeness. So I will possibly, I know in a couple of places lower down, I know mine isn't quite the same as the photograph. It's pretty close. If I did it again, I probably, once you've studied her face so closely and intensely, you get to know where everything is. So I might make it a little bit more accurate next time I did it. I might be in a different frame of mind. I might create something completely different and really loose. And that's what I mean. You don't try to emulate what I create. Try to create your version. Follow the technique and methods I show you. You'll find your own comfortable way of working. See here, literally I'm just filling in those shapes, and I'm just filling them in, like literally colouring them in. There's no fur texture going in there. Ignore all the texture. We're just colour blocking. Just colour blocking. And like I say, once these are going in quite lightly for now. We'll go into these so many times. Like I say, when we create the fur later, we'll flick them out over, and we'll flick lighter colours over the top to soften it. But I just want to make sure I don't lose these markings. You also see there I've got the glassine paper under my hand as I work, so I'm not going to smudge, not as there's anything down, no pigment down underneath my hand yet, but I don't want to get any grease from my hand onto the paper either. Anything to avoid either smudging or tarnishing, marking my paper. We're working on, because we're working on the anthracite paper as well, it's very forgiving. I find it's the one of the pastel mats that's got pretty much the most tooth. Like I say, you can just keep putting layers on there. There is one thing I did notice, actually, I will point it out to you later on. You'll see it appear as we put light layers on down underneath that left-hand eye. There is actually a flaw in the paper. This does not come to light until I start to build pigment down there. You won't see it by the end of the drawing, so don't panic if you find you have got flaws in your paper. You can eradicate them later on. I must admit, I saw it appear and I was like, oh, you could not see a thing. No hint whatsoever that there was a flaw in the paper until I started to build the pigment on there, and then it became visible. So just don't panic if that does happen to you. Okay, so my voice is going to drop in and out of the this hour of the tutorial because quite literally it is repeating the same thing all the way through. So I've just zoomed out a little bit there. The other thing as well, I did this piece at 12 by 14 inch, and I would recommend possibly you do her a little bit smaller. You'll get slightly less detail in, but she won't be quite such a challenge. If you do want to do the same size, then go for it, but just appreciate it. There is a lot of work in this. I can't wait to see the results that you all come up with though. Okay, see here, so far I've used the raw umber. We will bring in some burnt ochre later on in the lower parts and a little bit on the cheeks, but for now it's just the raw umber, dark indigo, and also the black. So quite simplistic. So you see there as well, where I've got a little touch of white, I've already knocked it back with a tiny bit of black. And now I've got the dark sepia. So you can see where I said about we layer, I've already gone over some of that raw umber there with the dark sepia. So then you'll start to get a mix of the two colours, and it takes many layers for these to blend. And like I say, I could go over that again with the raw umber, I could go back over it with the dark sepia, back over it with raw umber. It'll keep coming back and coming back. That's the beauty of using the pastel mat. Don't be afraid of it. Don't be afraid of putting your darks down and then your lights are going to be going over the top. If you've watched the progression of the actual piece, with the photos that I've done, you'll see that I took it, put in all this underpainting, quite dark, then I add some lights, then I knock it all back down to dark, and then I bring it all back up again, keep bringing in the colours, take it all back to dark, and then the texture layers come in at the end. And that's where you see here, still using the side of the nib of the pencil, just mapping in. Someone gave a really good analogy of how my work seems to come together the other day, and it was, I loved the way they described it. And they said that when I do put up my step-by-steps, it's a bit like at the beginning, you're looking through a camera and it focuses on the eyes, but the rest of it seems out of focus. And then with each layer that I add, it gradually starts to become into focus, and then by the end, obviously, it's really sharp. And I just think that sums up perfectly how I do work. So I might actually pinch that analogy and use that to describe how I put it together. I usually say that with each layer, I refine that a little bit more. Each layer refines and defines the details, the colour, the contrast, the texture a little bit more. But I'll just say, it brings it a little bit more into focus, just like with a camera. So we're just working up around that top left-hand corner now. And just remember what I said again, ignore the fur texture, ignore all the lights over the top. We need to get our darks in place. Unless those darks are there underneath, you can't flick your white fur or your grey fur or your fur texture out over the top. There's nothing for it to sit on. Wherever you see dark shadows, even if it's just a hint of them underneath the light coloured fur, you have to put them in, and you have to take it as intense and as dark as it is showing through. So down back over the top left hand corner, you'll see it sinks away into darkness underneath the shadow behind. You need to get that intensity in there. Otherwise, like I say, when you start to work your way forward, building your layers, there's nothing for the light fur strokes to sit over the top of. Don't be afraid of pushing your values. That's what I find with a lot of people. They're afraid, especially with a pastel map, and I see someone, like, say, they'll start a piece and they'll have it finished the next day on pastel map. And when I look at the size of a piece, it's like there's no way, even if they work through the night, that they have pushed the values, the texture, the tooth. There's no way they could have pushed the paper to its limits and achieved the maximum contrast, depth, trying to think of my word, texture. There's no way that they've achieved what they can push, the limit to. Hopefully, let's say, start off with this quite light if you're quite new to this. It's to say this is a bit of a challenge to an absolute beginner, but just watch the video, understand the technique, and maybe choose a simpler reference image. I'm going to pop up one of the ones for the $10 tier and above for this month. You've got the tiger as well, but I'm going to pop up a lion. So also it's going to be a close-up, or one of them will be a close-up. I might give you an extra one. You could use the lion which then eliminates all of these spots and stripes markings. Why didn't I do a lion? And you can literally just go in and follow this technique, this process, in a much simplified manner. You'll still follow exactly the same method though, building the layers and then going in with the texture later on. You just won't have to worry quite so much about the placement of all of these markings, because that, like I say, is a bit of a challenge. So you can see here why I have sped this up, because we're literally following that line drawing. You see, every time I pause, I say my eyes are constantly looking at the reference photo. I'm not just filling in the shapes on the sheet, I'm following my reference. As you see here how simple the colour palette is, or again, all I've used so far, apart from that white around the eyes, is that raw umber, dark indigo and the black. We'll get all those mid-tones and darks in, and then later on come in and start adding in our lights. And then we'll just rotate and keep repeating the process. So just a little touch here going in on the nose, literally just so I've marked something in there. I wouldn't worry about that one too much at the moment. I just wanted to make sure I had a little bit of the shape in there before I then just carry on. We've moved down to the midsection now, but just carrying on exactly like we did at the top. Wherever we see some of the mid-tones or the shadows showing through the light fur, we make sure we get those down. So you see down that right hand side, because this snow leopard, when I took the photo of her, she wasn't stood up looking square on at me. She was actually lying down and she was twisting her head looking out towards me. So that is why it's not a truly symmetrical piece. So the left hand side of the ruff and the mane on the left hand side is completely different to the right hand side. It's because she's twisting. which I think is quite nice. I mean, I've done the white tiger before, very symmetrical, which is it's fine. But I guess the viewer might look at this and think, oh, well, the left, looks completely different to the right. Yes, it is, but that was the pose that she had. I guess if you wanted to make it symmetrical, you could just mirror the left-hand side to the right, and then it would look more like a real intense face-on image. But I love all of the umber and the ochre. A lot of people, when they do sneppers, literally just use blacks and whites and greys. But there is so much of that lovely browny, tanny colour coming through in their coat. It depends what their climate is as well. Obviously, I took this photo in the UK, as this girl is in captivity. But if you're out in the wild and they're in a snowy backdrop, then their fur winter coat is going to reflect their environment that they're in, because they are known as obviously the ghost of the mountains, very elusive. A lady who bought my original snow leopard from 6 years ago now, she actually works hands-on with the one of the Snow Leopard Conservancy charities out in Nepal. So she's also an amazing photographer, so she does get to see these guys in the wild, even though it is still very elusive, even for her. I would never get this shot in the wild. Most of my animals I photograph in the wild, I usually get their rear ends. They disappear as they run away from me. So, as much as I hate going to sea and seeing animals in captivity, I try to make sure that the places that I visit aren't your regular zoos that are breeding animals just for their own sort of benefit. I try to make sure that the places I visit, a lot of the animals are more sanctuaries where that they've rescued animals from circuses, or they're ex-breeding machines from other places in Europe or around the world. I'm going to visit polar bears again up in Yorkshire in a couple of weeks when I hold a workshop up there. Now, those bears are mainly rescued from Europe because they've come to the end of their breeding pattern and they would otherwise be destroyed. So at least the sanctuaries are giving them some sort of freedom, some sort of happy ever after, some sort of life, that they can just live out their years safe and looked after. And I know it's not ideal, but that's what us mankind have done. And whilst people still pay to go and see these animals perform in circuses and as part of wildlife acts on holidays, then sadly we need sanctuaries to be picking up the pieces still, as hard as it is. So here we're down to the lower part now. As you can see, we haven't really put in any of the lighter colour apart from a tiny touch of the I put a tiny touch of warm grey 3 up the side of the nose. We're still just focusing on trying to work top to bottom, getting black, raw umber, and dark indigo in top to bottom, so that we have. I will be popping up scans as I work as well to one side, so you will be seeing these popping up as I've stopped at each stage just to scan for the digital tutorial, which obviously all of you guys in the $10 and above tier will also be receiving. Again, all of this I'm marking, apart from the dots, which are hopefully all in the spots are all in the right place. It's all movable later on. It's just so we've got some pigment in there, some sort of marking. Back to our dark sepia again there. The dark sepia and that raw umber work beautifully together to help create that lovely undertone. Nougat is another one that I love to use. You'll see here, I mean, if you looked at the reference image, some people might look at the reference image and go, oh, the chin's white, the muzzle's white. It's like, no, but you just got to see the shadows underneath. The white fur is just over the top. We need to look underneath at all those fur tones. You see there, I'm just using that dark sepia over the top of some of that raw umber that we put down. I'm using it quite quickly and quite loosely as well. And that's the good thing as well about holding your pencil on the side like this. You can work quite quickly. So, okay, so we've got a good foundation pretty much all over. Just going in now across the top now with that dark sepia just to balance out what I've added in at the bottom. Knocking back straight away some of that, the umber across the top, exactly the same as I did across the bottom. So now we're going in with one of our greys. We start to, again, loosely. We're just going to go in, loosely start mapping in over the top where those lighter part of the stripes are. And just remember, this is really early days. We are just mapping this in. This is more to give us placement as well as getting some pigment down. It's to help us get those markings in. Obviously, if you do this but use the lion photo, you haven't got to worry about this quite as much. You can be going in with your darks and your umbers and ochres and just rotating, building those. Lifting them up with maybe an ivory or a light flesh, one of your light warm greys as well, and then you'll knock it back again with your darks and your mid-tones and keep repeating the process until you get a lovely texture. You see instantly, I mean, now that you can start to see that, yeah, this is a snow leopard. Let's see how quickly all I'm doing. You'll find, if you're quite new to pastel matte as well, when you build layers, if you put your darks and your mid-tones down, as soon as you put a light over the top of them, see I'm going over all of that area there, just how rough the tooth shows through. And that's why every time you go in, you'll knock it back to dark and then pop your mid-tone in, and every time you do that, next time you add your light, it will be slightly less rough, slightly less tooth showing through, slightly less texture. And that's because we're building that pigment. If you go in too hard a pressure, you'll crush the tooth and it will give you less layers, is less forgiving, and you won't be able to get in as many details. So just be patient. I told you this. Both colour pencil teaches you patience, and working on pastel matte teaches you even more patience. As you can see here, I've got quite short pencils. I have got a few pencil holders, but I was rotating between them, trying to use up some nubs of pencils. So here, again, all we're doing literally going in with our lights, marking in. So that area there where I am now, remember we went in first of all, we put down raw umber. We went over it with our dark sepia, and now we're going over it with one of our warm greys. Some places I'll add a little bit more pressure than in others. But this is literally just how quickly. Again, I'm not really even worrying too much about the direction of the fur. I'm just happening to kind of draw it in the direction of the fur because that's the way my pencils are moving down and outwards from the eye. It does get you into the habit, so I'd say it's because of the stripes. I'm just working my way upwards and outwards. But at least if you start at this point working in direction of the fur, even if it's very loose and blocky at this stage, then it'll help each time you refine a layer and work a layer, that you keep that in mind, that you know where you start to learn with her, where her fur direction, where it the angles it goes at. So like with the cheeks, get your reference photo, lay a pencil or a straight edge across the direction of the fur, and then lay it on your drawing so you can check that you're getting it at the right angle. Because her cheek fur, yeah, it does come down away from the eyes, but unlike a lot of animals like dogs, it would come down almost following the direction of the muzzle. With her, it is going pretty much out horizontally and then lifting up over a cheek and up towards under her ear. So quite different, and it does get, it's all to do with the anatomy and her fur, how it lies over the top. I know when I did this layer and I popped all the light over the top, I remember I took the drawing downstairs and I popped it up on the mantelpiece, and from a distance it looked really effective, and my husband was like, oh, that's coming on well, you know, you've got loads done. And it's like, then the next day, of course, I go up and I knock it all back again and all the lights disappear, and it's like, why did you do that? It's like, well, we have to do that. But I find working this way, working all over, it's really good for your creative mind, that you can see it happening rather than literally. I know some people like to concentrate on maybe a square inch at a time, finishing, bringing that to completion and then moving on to the next square inch. I just can't work that way. When we come to the detail layers, I'll work the top left hand side just to get a feel for it and make sure that everything's working as I imagine it's going to be, just to double check. But then I'll go back to working all over again until I'm building the layers of fur from the backwards forwards. So again, all we've used, remember, is the raw umber, dark indigo, our dark sepia, the black, and now our warm grey. I need to double check. I think it's either the warm grey 2 or 3. I'll double check which one that is. Obviously, everyone in the $10 and above tier will get the materials list and also the full digital tutorial download with all the written instructions as well. And obviously scans of the works in progress as we go along. You see here, some places there's only one layer of this grey gone over the top, other places there's a couple, some places I've just used extra pressure. Okay, so going in now with the white, just intensifying some of the brighter areas. So if you struggle, I mean, at the beginning, you need to have put your reference image into black and white as well and up the contrast so that you can see the brightest and the darkest areas. And that will really help your eyes later on. The other way is to squint at your reference photo. Not only does that eliminate all of the texture, it simplifies it down into darks, lights, and colours, shapes. And then literally all we were popping in here are our brightest and darkest areas. So just going in now with the white over the top. Remember, all of this is just the underlayers, underpainting. We'll be working so much more over the top. Other thing to remember as well is learning to understand your warms and your cool shades. Now her coat is very warm, hence why we've got a lot of that raw umber in there. We'll use ivory in there later on, and we're using our warm greys. Now the white is going in there, but remember your white is a very cold colour, and I will use a mix. I'm putting Polychromo down here. Later on we will lift some of the areas just using a white Pablo. You can stick to just using your Polychromo, that should be fine. Or if you're using a different brand of pencil, the white Pablo is just a little bit more opaque, it's a little bit brighter white, and I did just use it just to lift some of the areas that tiny bit more, give it a little bit more intensity. So here we had grey up around the top. I'm just going over it now with white, and you'll see from a scan that I pop up exactly sort of what I mean about the tooth of the mat showing through when you put a light over the top, and it'll give that roughness of the tooth showing through. So I'm not really putting in fur texture here, I'm working in the direction of it. My pencil is pretty much staying on the sheet of paper, and I'm just wiggling backwards and forwards. You'll see here the pencil is a little bit blunter. We don't want to be going in, when we change the angle of our pencil, we don't want to be going in now with a super sharp pencil yet. That is safe later on when we build the fur texture. So the pencil is a little bit blunt. Just literally wiggling, colouring in. Just think of it as colouring in, filling in the shapes. Okay, so even though we've done that lower area once, I'm just coming in now and just intensifying some of the area as well. So I've got the ivory in there as well, mixing in. So the bottom right, like I said, where we've got, where she isn't straight on, the bottom left is a lot cooler. So lots more white flecks in there than the right hand side, which is much warmer. You see there, do you see the flaw that I said about? See from the left hand eye, the lower part of the eye, about a third of the way in from the outer corner, you'll see a diagonal line going down towards the edge of the paper. Now that is the flaw that I was telling you about, that can sometimes show up with pastel matte, and there was no hint whatsoever that that flaw was in place before I started adding pigment. And then you can see it when I put this light layer on. Not only does it show more of the tooth coming through, but you can also see any flaws in the manufacturing process of the paper. I'm fine with it. Like I say, if someone was leaving, you can see I've zoomed in as well, and you can see what I'm talking about with the actual texture of the tooth. So we've worked top to bottom now with our base layer of the raw umber. Then we added our dark indigo, black, dark sepia. Then we've gone over with our lights of our warm grey, our white, our ivory. And now we go back over and we start to repeat the process. So where we've lost all of the umber, I've also popped in a tiny bit of burnt ochre as well, you'll have noticed. So now we start to go back in and we pop back in the all over again. We just repeat it exactly like we do when we build our base layers, our colour blocking on our watercolour underpainting. We go back in with our midtones, our darks, up to our lights, and then we will keep repeating the process, making sure we've got our placement just right. And then we build and build and build and refine until we get to the point where we can go back in with the super sharp pencils and add our fur texture. You see here with the amber that it's going in over the top of both the lights and the darks, so it will go in over the black. There's a little bit of the indigo. And here's just to say, just squint, just eliminate that fur texture, and you'll get a lovely feel. It's lovely working on the anthracite pastel mat, because your lights, everything just shows up so well on there. And also think about, right at the end, if you watch all the videos all the way through, right at the end, I'm going to use my knife on this one. So at the end, keeping in mind that we are working on the anthracite, really dark base support, when I use a knife to scrape off the pigment right at the end, I can get super, super, super fine fur texture showing through. So I can get really much finer than a pencil stroke. I can get that fur texture coming through. If you can see here, top left and right, where I've now put down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 layers, tiny touch of that red violet going in there, but again, I don't know if I'd put that in again if I did this a second time, so I'm not going to include it as part of the tutorial. Even though there's hints in there, I don't use them on the final layers. I could just see them as part of the colours. If you want to pop it in, that's fine, but I say it's not necessary. You'll see here, this is starting to build up a nice smoothness already, and we are still, I say, super, super early days. So I'm just rotating between all of those shades that we've used now. So back in now with the dark indigo, and you see we work all the way, all over that light. So all that light that was in there, we knock it all back again now. And people say, well, why did you bother putting it in to start with? It's like, this is the way we build the layers. And as once you understand this, then you accept it, then your patience kind of kicks in as well and goes, okay, it's fine. I'm not supposed to be achieving, you know, super fine crisp lines yet and super fine fur texture yet. Lisa did it with hers, then it's okay. And you're okay, you're fine. And again, pressure wise here, still using the same pressure, about a 3 to a 5, possibly more like a 3 or a 4, so not really heavy pressure, because I'm just relying on building layers. So even those whitest parts underneath the eyes, we've just knocked all of that back as well. Because you'll find if you try and eliminate the tooth, I don't know why this works. If you try and eliminate the tooth by putting light on light on light on light, the tooth just comes through and it just becomes a flat white or a flat grey or a flat cream light area with the grain coming through, and it just looks horrible. If you knock it back with a mid-tone or a dark and then put light over the top, it becomes soft. The tooth starts to disappear, the pigment builds, and it becomes a lovely, lovely layer to then put your fur texture through later on. It's just the way it works. If you keep trying to put white on white on white on pastel matte, it doesn't really, it just clogs and it doesn't really eliminate the tooth and build the lovely texture. You just want to, you need to knock it back with a dark or a mid-tone. So back in now as well with the black, just making sure we've got our markings still in the correct place. Again, I'm putting some of that black in over a lot of the light areas as well. So this time when I'm just going over some of those original spots, I've taken them out over the edge, whereas before I was kind of filling in inside of the line drawing lines. Now I've just taken them out a little bit over those edges. Partly to eliminate the graphite, to be honest, that was there underneath. I just want it gone because some of it is shining through. Because I say normally I wouldn't use transfer paper. I've just done it for this one so you guys could see what I was working on at the beginning. I probably would just use like indentation and then angled my light so that I could see where my lines and my placement was, but that's more difficult for me to record for you guys to be able to see, hence why I use that transfer. I wouldn't advise using, you can use the white transfer paper, I wouldn't advise it because the white lines can be quite hard to eradicate even by putting all these layers on. It's just something, like I say, I know students have tried it and I've tried it, and sometimes you used to say you're trying to work an area just to get rid of the white line drawing, and it's not something that you wanted to include as part of your actual process for building layers. So the graphite will show up fine. You just might have to angle a light that it shows, reflects the graphite lines when you're working on it. But it's definitely the better option. So here, going in with the ochre over the top, and exactly the same over the cheek, down over the nose. We'll take the ochre all the way over that the umber over that right hand side as well. And again, see, quick, loose. See how quick I'm working. Okay, that's sped up a little bit, but you can see again, look, I'm holding that pencil 2/3 of the way up, so that's how loose I'm holding it. And I just want to literally still get pigment down. So much texture on tooth on that paper that I need to build on. You see that flaw in the paper? As I put an extra layer on there, it is taking it back down a tiny little bit. As I say, it's going to take, when we put the texture layers on later on, that's when I'll finally eradicate that flaw in the paper. Okay, and as I said before, we're taking that umber all the way down over the right hand side. I'm even taking it over my darks. It's strange, when you start building these layers, you get such a lovely sense of achievement each time you take it back down to dark and then up to light, and you see it starts to smooth out slightly more. You think, yay, I'm actually getting somewhere. And you realise just how far you've got to go still. Okay, so it's the final part now of creating this stage that I've managed to break it down into to keep it quite logical. So we're coming down to the final part of creating this dry underpainting. So just bringing the raw umber down over these bottom edges. And you can see straight away how much that softens it back. I think what I'll do is at the end of this I will do a little add in transitions of those first stages of the scans, one after the other, to come up in front so that you can see exactly what we've done in this hour of video. It'll make more sense then. You can see in between, you know, sort of like what happened after I added all that layer of umber at the beginning, and the sepia, the dark indigo, the black, the grey, and you'll see each stage step by step. It'll make more sense. And you hopefully you can see the transition and the process and the results of each part of the process, what each little bit achieves. And you can't really cut corners. So it's just the dark indigo going in over the top here now. And there's some of the burnt ochre that I mentioned. I was going to pop in some of the burnt ochre in a few places. Just a little bit more orangey down on that right hand side. And let's say a little touch on the cheeks we'll use later on as well. Just I can see it there, so I just want to intensify that a little bit before I move on to the next stages. I was tempted to use flesh colours in through there. I use a lot of cinnamon and light flesh usually, where I've got like creamy ivory fur, but I didn't in this one. I just stuck to, I've kept it quite simple with the colour palette. So just adding a bit more definition back in now where we've lost some of the markings. So literally just going in with the black pencil here. Even though I'm popping in all of these markings here, you'll see me later on adjusting them all. So it's not a problem that I've put in a black spot on there. If I want to eradicate that black spot later on, I can. I can make all these marks, well, pretty much all these marks disappear still later on if I wanted to. Even like say those dark black spots, if I want to remove those still at the moment by adding lighter pencils over the top, I still can. You still see that flaw down on the left hand side there at the moment, but you can see it's just softening out a little bit with each layer that goes over it. Okay, so it's coming to a point now where we've filled in most of, well, all of the paper, top to bottom, left to right. It's all got a good coverage, quite a nice level of depth of contrast, colour, for us to have a nice foundation to then start to build the fur texture next. Obviously we need to increase, let's say that there's so much extra contrast needs to still go into this, but that will come from building our, we've done our colour blocking, next we'll start building our layers and creating fur texture and using more pressure with our pencils as well at times. Again, this is my pressure. If you've got a slightly lighter hand or a slightly heavier hand, then you'll achieve these steps a tiny bit quicker or a tiny bit slower. No pressure for you whatsoever to achieve anything more than your own likeness from this reference at your own pace. So we shall leave this stage here. I will add those scans on to the end of the video as well as showing you all the way through. And I've zoomed in again at the end so you can still see that roughness of the tooth in there and you should understand. Okay?